Hey, VC Jeff here. I've been holding off doing this video. I was going to do it last week, but I don't know. I knew it was going to be a little time consuming. I hope this doesn't turn out to be too long. I know it's only going to really be of interest to people probably of a certain, you know, it's about Petra, a Christian rock band. But you could look at this as kind of a real brief introduction and history of a genre of music that came about, because I'm always interested in music documentaries where they talk about, how rock and roll got its roots, or some of the rhythm and blues that turned into this, or, how bands and were influential to more musical styles. And that's kind of what this story could be about. I'm going to try to just briefly talk about it and show some of the new reissues that just came out. And so if you're not familiar, Petra started in 1972. Their first album was in like 74. And they were pivotal in the Christian music because I'm sure you go to the thrift stores, you see the bins are full of gospel records, it seems, all the time. That was the music style. We're talking the people with the funny clothes and the funny dresses and the suits and they're singing the, kind of countryish, folkish, lots of vocal harmony type bands. That was the norm. As far as it goes to contemporary music of the church or of Christianity at that point. That would have been the norm. While the rest of the world was getting into the rock and the hard rock of the 60s, the 70s, the church always kind of, was more on the, mellower or, folksy countryish side tended to be the style. So, when Petra came along in 72 and then with their first album in 74, it had some of that folksy appeal that you would be used to, maybe a hint of the, country side. But the thing that made them different was the fact that they would pop on an electric guitar. And that was just, there weren't many bands in the Christian realm, at least not any that were signed to any record labels, that were really doing a lot of that. So it really did kind of set them apart as being kind of an oddity, because now we've got a Christian rock band, electric guitars, distortion. Not yet, you listen to them and you're like, yeah, it was very tame compared to some of the bands that were at that time that were coming out in the early 70s. But if you think about the realm of music that, the church was listening to and had available at that time, it was pretty radical. And so in the 80s and the later 70s, they only had like, three albums in the 70s before they, three or four, 74, 77, 79. Okay, so they had three albums. By the time I discovered them, so I was brought up kind of in the church from the, mid to late 70s on. But by the time we get into the 80s, I'm listening to the 80s metal of the time. So, the Motley Crue, the Judas Priest, the Iron Maiden, just everything you could think of, just think 80s, and it was there from the early 80s. So when I'm going to church and, one of the youth leaders or somebody at the church says, wow, if you like rock and roll, you should really listen to Petra. No comparison. Their stuff in the early 80s was very light rock. But for the, church music and the church people, even that late into the early 80s, it was still kind of radical. I mean, bands were starting to change. You had the psych movement in the Christian realm that was happening in the 60s and 70s and the Jesus music and all that. But still, a lot of those bands were kind of folksy, kind of, acousticy, with vocals and stuff. But then you have some of these bands coming around like Petra, like the Res Band and things like that were coming in the 70s and starting to bring some of the grit of rock and roll. But when I go back and listen to the early 80s stuff, when I was, into the metal of the early 80s, there's no comparison. So when people would suggest that to me, I looked at it and laughed. I said, Petra is not even, I don't even consider it rock and roll hardly. It's rock and roll, but I don't even consider it anywhere close to hard rock or metal. So I kind of poo-pooed the idea. It wasn't until a couple years later in the mid 80s when I decided to strengthen my faith and kind of put aside all of the mainstream secular non-Christian movement music, non-Christian music, and just kind of focus on getting stronger in the faith and listening to just Christian music is when I said, okay, let's give Petra, another shot. By that point, they were into the poppier stuff, and still was kind of rock. But of course, we had metal by then. We had the Stripers, we had the Barnabases, the Leviticus, the Jerusalems, the Messiah Prophets of 85. There was some of that. But when you are limited to the amount of metal and you're strictly listening to the Christian music, you start reaching out a little bit further. So you start listening to more of the pop and some of the, rock stuff. Petra came in, and I ultimately fell in love with their stuff. And so, anyway, that's kind of a long story short. There's a bigger history behind them, but it was really pretty radical at the time. Just like any, you think of a punk band. Who was the first punk band? They would have been considered radical at the time because it was unheard of. It's the same type of thing, even in mainstream music. The first band to pull on an electric guitar. It's the same thing, just years later in a different realm of music. So the Girder Music has reissued a lot of great stuff in years and in past years, and it just recently got permission because Petra was one of the mainstream. They had a major label distribution, and so they have been kind of. I don't think their stuff has really ever been reissued, and in all these years, it didn't seem like anything's ever been reissued. And while a lot of it is still available, you look back at some of the, the production and stuff of the 80s when CDs came out and everything, and this is for almost any band, there just wasn't a lot of money being put into it. So when you put out albums like this, you can see, it's probably hard to tell, but, it kind of faded. This is a 2-for-1. You're missing some tracks. Let's put Wash is Whiter Than on the back of Never Say Die. We'll throw it in there, but we'll have to take off a track or two to make it fit. More power to you. Just plain old white background. The inside, yeah, it's got a picture on the back, but what's inside? No, not much. Minimal pictures at best. I won't go through all of these, but for the most part, and this is almost probably, you go back and find half of the bands that you probably listened to in the 70s and 80s when they put them out on CD. It was nice price, fast, quick, nothing but just nothing, just a cover. Some of the goofiest, cheapest way of putting out things. And that's how pretty much all of these were the same thing in the Christian market. It was just there wasn't much put into it. This, Beat the System, was the first, in 1985, I think is when I bought my first CD player. They were hot, they were new, CDs were the big thing, but in the Christian realm, the only 2 CDs that they had at any store anywhere around our neighborhood when I was living in the military down there, there was only 2 albums in the Christian section. Petra, Beat the System, Amy Grant, Unguarded. As far as I knew, those were the first 2 Christian CDs released, but I have learned in recent years that I guess there were some other ones, but they totally out of my realm. But anyway, so Petra's Beat the System was the last one with vocalist Greg X Volts. And again, it's just bare bones release. Then they came out with a new singer, and they came out with these, and of course we're getting now into the later 80s, but even still, the CDs are pretty bare bones. Just none of these, to my knowledge, I don't think any of these have been reissued on Fire, have been reissued, repressed, remastered, or anything on vinyl, on CD, on anything until now. Girder Music got the rights, and I'm sure it took them a lot of work and a lot of money to get the rights to release the Petra catalog. Now they didn't put out the first 2 albums. They jumped right into Wash is Whiter Than. And the thing that's nice about what they've done here, not only, this is just like the Leviticus one I did a couple videos ago showing the Girder reissues, where these are just top notch. I'm not going to go through every one of these, but if you went back and watched the Leviticus and just the amount of content in the book, the pictures, everything that's been beefed up, it's the same here. I'm going to show you a couple of them though. Wash is Whiter Than for the first time on a single CD without any of the tracks missing, and Never Say Die also. So for the first time we have, complete albums with nothing missing. But They've all got the cards. I won't show, they've all got these trading cards they've been doing, but this is Reissues done right. This is a band that deserves it, vindicated by just absolutely masterful, beautiful releases with booklets, lyrics, color, remastered by Rob Caldwell. They all sound amazing. I mean, I've loved these albums for going on, what, 40 years now, 30 some odd years. And now they are just so much more, so much more. Now, they didn't do the first two albums. The first album, Petra, and then Come and Join Us, I picked up the other day in the used bin. Those two, who knows, maybe they'll go back. Those are two of the earlier, there was some electric guitar on there, like I say, but they were kind of finding their way. When they started getting into some of this is when Greg X Volch was really the solid singer, and it was like full, it felt more like a band. Those first two albums had, various singers, various musicians, and it was great albums. But anyway, again, the cards, I won't show all these, but just you get the impression, get the picture that, inner linings, beautiful. The thing about the artwork, I will show you that comparison. I mean, look at, there's no comparison. Look at that. This is the original. This is the, current one. It's beyond amazing as far as just the improvement that they've done on these. More power to you. This is about the time, this one or Not of This World, this is about the time when people were trying to get me in church to listen to them. These were the hot new releases. And I will say, some of the songs, the band, when they still play, they do play a lot of the classics, and these two albums, hold a lot of those. And I mean, this is the stuff that in my early Christian walk in my, in the 80s, that I was just eating up. And just to see these done so well with the cards. Again, I'm not going to show them all, but there are some that I'm going to jump to. They're all, they got the booklets, they got the pictures, they're all beautifully and wonderfully made. But some of them just have this amazing, here you go. And it's going to be hard to see. Okay, so the image, so you've got the inset, you've got on some of the booklets where it's kind of, a flat, and then, but what they've got is they've got some decorative high gloss. And here it's got the Petra logo. You can't really see, it's like right over that. Let me see, there was another one, and let's see if you can see this, but yeah, see the shiny, it's got flames on there down here, juxtaposed against the flat. There's a lot of that appears throughout the booklet. You can see there's a high gloss Petra logo. You might can see it over there. That's just the little extra things that were done. And yes, so all of these were also reissued on vinyl. Splatter, various colors, just where vinyl looked beautiful. I bought the CDs mainly because you could get them all as a set. They were a little cheaper. And when the vinyl were released on the special sales, I just didn't have the money at that point. Every time I kept seeing the specials about to end, or hey, this is the special pricing is about to end, I'm pulling my hair out because I really, really wanted to make the plunge because the mock-ups of them look beautiful. The thing that kind of held me back is I have all of the original, OG copies of Petra. So when you've got an original copy, you're kind of like, I don't know, in my case, I'm not always as quick to jump on a reissue because I've already got it. But the thing is, they look so beautiful, and the first time they've been reissued, they probably sound even more amazing. So when it comes down to that struggle, and the struggle is real, when it comes down to the struggle of I've got the OG and I really would like to get the remaster, it really is a timing issue and a money issue. And to pick up like, they're like 9, they release them in sets of 3 over a short period of time, but just to pick up that many, I just, with so much else going on and so many other reissues going on, I couldn't afford it. And now the special deal is over. So these things have been selling like hotcakes. They have been some of the best, selling stuff. Here, can you see that? See how shiny it is right in the middle of that book? Gives you an idea. Just, anyway. One day, if there's any left over, if there's another Black Friday sale where all of a sudden, hey, we did have some straggler Petra albums left over and the price goes down and I got the money at the time, I'm definitely going to want to jump on them. But I did decide to go ahead and get the CDs and upgrade my CD collection because they sound wonderful. They look absolutely wonderful. And I just had to do it. I had to do it. These are pivotal albums from my early Christian walk. They still have a warm place in my heart. I absolutely love all these songs. I'd love to see the rest of the catalog, which I'm assuming they're going to, continue. First two albums would be great, but again, those are probably the oddball ones. And then there were a handful of albums that came out after this batch. So I'm hoping, that'd be nice. But for now, I went ahead and picked up the CDs. They sound amazing. They look amazing. It is just a job done well and a job done right. It's great to see some of this classic stuff that was just kind of thrown out there cheaply, in the days when it came out in the early days of CDs were coming out. Now it's been done right where they've actually got, real effort put into the reissues. So anyway, just wanted to show that. I know this has been a little longer. I am going to try to trim this down because it's running long, but Girder Music, they're done such a justice on this. It is so good, and they've done so many other bands like this. 2 thumbs up to everybody involved in these reissues, and thanks a lot for watching, and I'll be back later. Rock on, rock hard.